And welcome back to the show. And we're here today with Sandra Nomoto, and she formerly had a PR agency called Conscious PR, and she's recently written a book about PR, and it is called The Only PR Guide. It's a pretty cool book, and with Sandra being a PR expert, there's lots of valuable tools held within the book. And why don't we just bring Sandra into the show and welcome Sandra.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael.
So, okay, I kind of remember part of this story about what inspired Conscious PR. But why don't you tell us a bit more about that story?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I started my business at the beginning of 2008. Prior to that, I was working at a small PR firm here in town in Vancouver. Quickly rose from intern to assistant to the partners in a year and a half, and decided it was time to leave. And just something told me I didn't want to apply at any other firms. At the time, my sister was her own business owner and had a similar journey, went from admin assistant to partner of a small business. And I saw her being her own boss. So I went, hey, I think I can do this as well. So I started the business in 2008 and just didn't know. I thought it was going to be like a solopreneur type of business, just me consulting. And I focused primarily on lifestyle businesses, so events, fashion, beauty, more of the fun types of industries, and that changed quite a bit in 2011 when I happened to work with an intuitive coach who was putting on a really cool event, and through her I started meeting a whole bunch of really cool conscious entrepreneurs, I call them, so business owners whose businesses were actually benefiting people or benefiting the environment in some way. And I myself was rediscovering my own values as an adult and realized that I wanted to pivot my business to cater to those businesses as well. So I decided to rebrand into Conscious PR. That was in 2012. And so that was kind of history. And then from from that point up until I closed the business last year in 2018, I had a few staff members, achieved certified B Corporation status, and it was really reflective of my own personal values in terms of positive social and environmental impact.
Cool. I do remember you achieving the B Corporation because I covered one or two of the events, either with photography or a video, and interviewed a few people. It just happened not to get you that time. So with all that story and success that you were having, and now you've written a book about all that, right? Or a book about how to use PR. So I call it an A to Z guide or A to Z guide for the Canadians. And it really actually talks about quite a few issues that I myself just never got to touch with our clients. We were a small business. A lot of our clients were small businesses, many in the Vancouver area, and we did have a few U.S. clients. But I would say a lot of the big picture type of PR issues, never really came across our client work, and we're really lucky. Like, we didn't have any major crises that happened with our clients, but that's not the case for many corporations out there. And at the time of writing this book, I was actually planning on rebranding again. So I wrote this in sort of the spring of 2017, and that year I was planning to partner up with other like-minded businesses. So these would be other people also in the impact space, but who offered services that we didn't. So, so very, very, very diverse team, from graphic and web designers to researchers, event planners, and then more on the internal side, people who would help with culture, branding, developing CSR programs. So I really envision this kind of dream team that could help businesses develop their public relations, not just on the external side, which is what everybody thinks PR is, but also on the internal side, because it's that internal part that's so important. If you don't know what your company's values are and you're not motivating and keeping really great team members, that's actually going to hurt you almost as much as, like a bad tweet would, right? So when I decided to close down the company last year, I had this book written, and I thought to myself, do I still want to put it out there? I don't really practice PR anymore. I don't plan to. And I decided I'm going to go for it. First, because I always wanted to be an author, and it was just kind of this bucket list item that I've always had. And second, because I think it's still hugely useful. And again, the perception of what PR is these days is not really reflective of what I know or believe that it could be.
Well, PR at times has some very different rules than what it may have in the past. But let's get into the book a little bit closer. And chapter 1 starts off with values, and you mentioned values in that last statement anyway. So let's start with values. Yes. So how important are values and the values that we actually bring into our company?
Yeah, they're so important. I mean, when you think about just like putting a job description out there, right? I think values should be in the job description, or at least the description of the company and what it does, because you need to align with the right people, right? If you don't attract the right people, again, you're going to have unmotivated employees. But to me, values are more than just like one word or like single words. That's what I mean to say. Single words that you throw up on your website and say, here are our values. Like, I would rather that companies make value statements. And I think a lot of the bigger ones, you're seeing them do that now, and really having, some pretty lengthy about pages, because it's not enough to just say, here are our top 5 values. Here's what we really stand for, and here's how we're actually doing it in our company. Because I think we're in an age right now where, you can find almost everything online in terms of information. And if you really want to stand out as a company, you really need to put that out there and also show how you're doing it. Because, prospective employees, prospective customers, I think they can see through the BS now. Mm-hmm. And it's really going to be those companies that walk their talk that are going to make it in the long run.
Well, I like what you said about you got to walk it, because if you put up there an about page and it has your values, one, aren't you naming your values before anyone else has a chance to brand you according to your values?
Absolutely, yeah, that's a good point. If you skip that step and you start doing your storytelling, then yeah, it gives your not even customers, even people just talking about you online, a chance to shape your brand, shape your character, and that can be pretty damaging down the road. So that's why it's so important in the branding process to really get that right. Like, before you do any sort of designing or writing, I suggest, that's why values is chapter 1.
Right.
It's because you got to do that step in the first place. And I admit, when I started my business, I didn't do this work. I went straight to, creating my own logo and business card. And, luckily I was a small business, but it wasn't until, 3 years later that I really thought, hey, am I running the business that is really reflective of me and what I believe in? And that's when I needed to make a change. So I tell people, even I didn't
do it to begin with. But now I realize, having worked with companies, how important it is.
Right. Okay. So chapter 2 is branding story, cultural manifesto. What exactly do you mean? I think we get the brand story, maybe, but what does cultural manifesto mean? And how do we get that?
The book will talk a bit more about it, but in essence, it's taking those values and then really it's the start of creating that story. So I suggest that a manifesto, and it's really just a fancy word for story, like what your company culture looks like as well. Because the values part is just, okay, who are we and what do we plan to do? When you get into the cultural manifesto, it's like, what is kind of the vibe that we want to bring to the people who work with us, right? So it's kind of like the start of that corporate culture. So I suggest that it includes the values, it includes your purpose, which a lot of people split up into vision and mission. Like, I don't think you necessarily need to do that. I think if you have a strong purpose statement, that should encompass both the vision and mission, and then how you treat your employees. Because, of course, you want to attract really great staff. And then once you've got a great team in place, that'll really be reflective of of your culture, and be positive in terms of your presence to potential customers and clients down the road.
You mentioned vision, and about 90% of the people that I interview, I ask them a question about their vision and their vision of the world, right? And it becomes really interesting when the public gets to hear and see that, right? And really important because people will align to you according to that vision and that mission, right?
Absolutely.
So chapter number 3, we're still in the brand story, but now, what is a brand book? It's like, so how do we we don't want to give the whole farm away, but how do we start to get at what that brand book would look like?
But yeah, a brand story or brand book takes that foundation that you've come up with in the cultural manifesto, and then creates it in some sort of document, right? So it can be an actual book, like a magazine, a printed magazine format, or it can just live digitally, right? But this is now where you're kind of putting the pedal to the metal and writing it down and showing it to others and having them, hold copies of it. So it could go to your team, as soon as you have a new team member come into the door, like right along with your employee handbook. You've got your brand book, or it could be like a tool for media or potential investors. But yeah, I go into some of the ways where you can tell that story in brand book form. Again, going along with some of the homework that came out of the cultural manifesto.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One more question about the book, and then I'm gonna ask some really tough questions about what your future's gonna look like. So we want people to buy the book, but we don't want to. That's the whole point. We want people to buy the book and then know who that they're buying the book from. So one more question about the book, and that would be about engagement programs.
Yes.
And what do engagement programs look like, and why are they so important?
So engagement programs can look different for every company because, of course, it depends on size and resources. A lot of the bigger companies will have a corporate social responsibility person, even a dedicated sustainability manager. So that person is primarily going to be responsible for the environmental programs that the company is responsible for. But really, engagement program just means how are you going to engage with your team to keep them happy, and how are you actually going to empower them to give back, right? And so here's where a lot of the volunteerism programs come in. Even simple things like recycling at the office or social committees, going out for drinks after work, kind of team activities. It's really about keeping, like it says, engagement programs, keeping your employees engaged, as well as a give back aspect to it.
So engagement programs also include like your company's community building things, community within the company as well as community outside the company and the public, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and what a lot of companies are getting caught doing is, they're throwing a lot of money at, certain charities, and then meanwhile, we can see that they're completely contradicting themselves in terms of how their office operates, right? And that's why it's so important that your public relations practice is from the inside out, so that you're operating from your values and what you stand for at all times, and that's reflective in both how you engage with your employees and then what other give back initiatives you're doing outside.
You know what? I now see. Now we're going to get into a little more about Sandra in this part. Okay, so I remember how we first met, and it was in Whistler at a economic conference where we were talking about how to shrink the wealth gap.
Mm-hmm.
Through a mutual friend, and a bunch of programs that she was trying to build in South Africa. So it says something about that we were both there. Says something about both of our companies, but one about you were there helping out, and I was there helping out, meaning that these type of projects were important to us to making a better world, right?
I would say so, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, so I know you said you were going to either rebrand or you were closing Conscious PR. So what are you going to do now in the future, knowing that these sort of projects are still out there and they need help for the people to find them?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, there's a lot of other public relations companies, and some I know who share, the values that our company had. They're either certified B Corp, or I know them through the Social Venture Institute community, and I know that they are doing really good work in terms of choosing the right clients and telling their stories. And so on the PR side, I see that there are some great companies that are still around, and I trust that they're going to carry on the torch that I think I've passed. But also, I would like to mention on the news side, because one of the big reasons why I closed down Conscious PR was because the main service that people came to us for was for media relations and getting their stories out in what we now call traditional media. So that's your newspapers, your radio and TV shows, your online media. And in Canada, it's a different story than what's going on in the US. There's a huge media industry in the US, but in Canada it's a lot smaller, and that has contributed to it declining faster, in my opinion. And so, one can say, there's really not a lot of outlets here in Canada that are telling great stories, and the stories that these great PR companies want to tell. But there's actually some really great local and also networks of media companies that I believe are really uncovering a lot of that
I don't want to say underground. How do I say it? Like untold, these untold stories that really need to get out there. So one example is the Discourse, which is a member-driven media outlet that is focused on investigative reporting. Another one is National Observer. So they were originally Vancouver Observer. Now they're national, and they're also member-driven. And they're doing a lot of great work in the environment space, in my opinion, and Indigenous issues. Same as the Discourse. And then there's a couple of similar companies in the U.S. and of course in Europe that I know of. But one that I like to mention is the Solutions Journalism Network. So this is actually a network of media outlets, primarily based in the U.S., that are working towards news that is impact focus. And one last organization I want to mention is Impact Relations, which is a nonprofit organization that Yulu PR started, and they have headquarters here in Vancouver, and they're all about the practice of impact relations. So it's just another way of terming public relations that is impact focused, and so they're driving it on the PR side as well. So even though we're not operating anymore, I do have a lot of hope and faith in these types of organizations.
Yeah. Did you mention it? Member-driven media, because we heard depictions are also part of independent media, which is basically another member-driven avenue. So.
Amazing.
It's amazing that you're bringing that up. So, as a business trying to get ourselves known, these member driven outlets that you're talking about, we probably have these business owners probably have stories that actually can help feed stories into these areas, don't they?
Well, I would hope so, and I go through the process that we did with our clients in the book, which businesses can do for themselves, but it's all about relationships. So first of all, you might have a great story, but if you don't know who to tell it to at the outlet, you got to start there, right? So it's getting to know who are the people who write for the outlet, who edit the outlet, getting to know them and what are the types of stories that they like to run, so that you can tailor your story to them accordingly. Mm-hmm. And that's really the crux of media relations. It's maintaining relationships. Twitter is a great tool that I used to use quite a bit, because that gives you a great idea of not only what kind of stories they're putting out there for the outlet that they work for, but what they're interested in. So mm-hmm. you'll get, based on the things that they're retweeting, that gives you an easy idea of the things that they're personally interested in. So you're making sure that you're not targeting your story to the wrong person, period, or the person at that outlet who isn't really, covering what your industry might be, right? So it's all about mm-hmm. like it sounds easy, but it takes a lot of research in the beginning. But once you start doing that research and developing those relationships, the storytelling part becomes easier.
Yeah, and I think you said something really important there. Is starting to build the relationships.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's right in the name of public relations and media relations. It's mm-hmm. the relationships, right? And I drove that. You'll see in the book that I drove that pretty home, because a lot of the PR companies out there, they just blast out these news releases to everyone under the sun and hope. And it's known as the spray and pray method for good reason, because it's not targeted, it's not focused. You're just hoping and praying that somebody there is going to pick it up and cover it, and that's really not how it should be done, even though it is in some circles. And quite frankly, like, you're doing the media consumer a disservice as well. You're wasting your own time and resources, and mm-hmm. in the end, it's really about the consumer who's going to read or consume that story. And so you might as well take the time and effort to do it right the first time and reach that consumer faster.
Yeah. You're right about the spray and pray method. My inbox is proof of the spray and pray method. And
I was just gonna say, yeah, you probably get these all the time. Right?
Yeah, and what happens? I don't necessarily click and send in the spam because you never know when somebody's going to have a valuable nugget or something that is about what I want to report. You never know, so I don't click the spam, but it does hit the internet round bucket. You just click through and like trash them. It's like, well, that's not what I want to be about. So if somebody's trying to become a public relations person, what would be your best advice to them?
I would suggest you reach out to a company that you might want to work for, based on the clients that they have and your interests, and put yourself forward as an intern. And might I suggest an unpaid one? I know that's not really how it's supposed to go in the province of BC, but you can try and apply. But if they're not hiring, you might be out of luck. But in my opinion, the best way to get experience is to actually do the experience. I don't always suggest going to school for these types of things because it's moving so fast. The tools and even the outlets, a lot of outlets coming up, a lot coming down, and a lot of staff moving from place to place. And so, if you go to school, by the time you finish your program, the tools might have already changed, or the way that storytelling is done might have already changed. So I suggest get that direct experience. A great way to get experience is to volunteer, maybe as a PR person for a nonprofit organization or a charity that you work for that may not have the budget to pay a permanent person, but it gives you the experience, and then it'll give them the chance to get their story out there. So that's what I would suggest, aside from picking up my guide.
Of course, we got to make sure that everybody's got to have your guide, right? It's very valuable. I was, when I was reading through it in order to come on to bring you onto the show, I was like, wow, that's so true. You have a lot of really great points in each and every chapter.
Thank you.
And I like how you set it up, part A and part 1 and part 2. That was pretty good too. So the part 1 being internal publications and part 2 being the external.
Yeah, I'm glad you observed that, because what a lot of people think public relations is completely external, and I'm only talking to my clients and customers. And that's one side of it. They are your public. But a lot of people forget their best ambassadors are their team and their employees. If you're treating your team like crap, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, they might not have done anything, but we're in an era now where everybody's talking online. And a lot of people are publicly quitting their jobs on YouTube, right? And if you're caught in that, if you're mentioned there, that's immediately it might not escalate so much to a crisis situation, but that's a big piece of negative public relations that you're then going to have to deal with. And so the more that you can invest into your internal PR resources, in my opinion, the better off that you're going to be.
Yeah, the hiring, and that's also a very important thing to remember as a business owner. The hiring and firing of an employee, if you do it the right way through culture, you don't get the bad press, right?
Absolutely.
So, okay, you, as a PR person, and because we're gonna we're going to start to run out of time soon. I want to ask some vision questions out of you about what you want to see our world start to look like. So.
Yeah, I feel like we're starting to move in a better direction, even though it may seem like, there are some huge systemic problems we have globally and none of them are getting fixed. I believe that it's really about knowledge empowering. And I speak personally about this because, for example, if it wasn't for me watching a documentary called Earthlings in 2007, I would never think about changing my diet to become more plant-based. And now, I'm actually coming up on 1 year completely plant-based diet. But that's something when I was growing up, I would have never considered. To me, vegans were, these hippie dippies who just smoked weed and ate vegetables. Which now that I'm older, isn't too bad of a lifestyle. But yeah, if it wasn't for that documentary, I wouldn't have cared so much for the animals and, looked at communities who were doing the same thing. Now you see this huge industry change with big companies who used to offer meat patties who are now offering plant-based products. And it's so reflective of the knowledge that is now going out there, not just about the treatment of animals, but how animal agriculture is one of the biggest contributors to climate change, even more so than all of the cars combined in the world. And so that's just one example of just with the knowledge that if you do something a different way, it can actually have huge positive effects. And that's just, that's one example of an industry that I see is making changes. And even though they're incremental right now, the more that people start making these small personal changes, the more that you see this massive collective effect, right? And I really do think in 5-10 years, the way that people eat is going to completely change. And that same type of exposure of knowledge that can powerfully change some other industries. And I can't think of any, right now, just offhand, but I see that same shift happening in a few other industries, and thus on a global level.
I can think of several other industries, but we will tie those into another show. we actually have a political show, and we'll save some of those for that. What about because this is about relations and relationships, how we relate to each other, like culturally and with say culturally, religion and all that sort of stuff. What do you see happening there?
Yeah, I definitely see shifts happening there. Religious, I can't speak too much of. Just not an area that I am hearing or seeing too much in the news personally. But in terms of cultural understanding, I do see that there are some shifts happening. Within companies, they're recognizing the value in diversity and inclusion. And that's, diversity on so many levels, right? Not just ethnicity, gender, ability, age. There's so many stories about the stat of, the majority female board of directors or executive tend to be more revenue generating than all male. So like something like that, we're seeing that for the first time in history. Maybe it was true at some point, but because it's so easy to share news now, these are the types of stories that we're starting to see in a new way, I think. And so if we start repeating more of these stories of the importance of women, including women, and diversity. And I love, things like the Me Too movement, where it's like, we're not going to take this abuse anymore. And before, maybe we didn't have a way to share it, but now, like I said, everything can be told and shared. People can't get away with this BS anymore, right? And so I'm definitely seeing a shift in that way as well. And I like that you said, but relationships between people, because it really is all about that one-on-one connection. I am a strong believer in that. As humans, we're all connected in some way, and so there's absolutely zero reason why you would discriminate somebody else just based on what they look like or how they were born.
Okay, last question, and then I want you to tell everybody how to actually go find your book. Okay? What would the perfect world look like to you?
I think I just described it. It's a world where people have genuine respect for each other. I think that's the number one thing. And then secondly, the other elements of our world. So the environment, which is our home, and other living beings. So that being plants and animals, because we really don't need animals for food if we're able to do agriculture right. And I'd add to that a knowledge of spirituality and the divinity that we each share, because I believe we all came from the same source. We're all on this journey together, and we're all moving in the same direction. So we may as well help each other while we're here.
Great. Okay, so where do we find the book?
You can find it on Amazon. It's the only public relations guide you'll ever need. And you can also find it on my personal website, nomoto.com.
Awesome. So, thank you, Sandra. It's been great finding you again. We'll have to remember to stay really close next time. So, it's an awesome book. I highly recommend it to every entrepreneur that I know. They need to go buy this book and read it and follow the steps and be surprised at where their business goes. So, thank you so much for writing it, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Michael.
All right. Talk to you later.